and welcome back to another Blu-ray review. And this time we're going to be talking about Eureka's release of the Junya Sato film from 1973, Japanese film made in Iran. We have Golgo 13, starring Ken Takakura as the titular character. Golgo 13. I love this slipcover, by the way. Let's just talk about this straight away. Tony Stella piece. I mean, his work is getting around a lot lately, but I love this one, especially this image here with the sun. There's a couple of great shots with kind of a sunset towards the end of the film, and that really captures that beautifully, I think. So, gorgeous slipcover. I don't know if we have any alternate artwork on this. I don't think there is. No, it's just kind of an inlay image. But yeah, I think that artwork is worth repeating on the inside inlay and even the disc itself. So Golgo 13, this one is, how would you describe it? Because the easy low-hanging fruit is to say it's like a Japanese James Bond movie set in Iran. But it has the James Bond feel, it has the kind of globe-trotting feel to it, and it has, you know, a guy who's on a mission, and, you know, there's women, and there's guns, and there's action, and there's intrigue, you know. But Golgo 13 is not a secret agent. He is an assassin. And so his actual character's name is Duke Togo, or Golgo 13. And I believe Golgo is kind of a reference to Christ, 13 being the unlucky number. So it's kind of an interesting name for this kind of mercenary character. But he is based on a manga, which is, I believe, still running, because from what I understood from the extras and stuff was that the creator of the Golgo 13 manga, Takao Saito, he set plans in motion for the character to continue past his death. He wanted it to be this continuing work that would continue throughout generations. And so, as far as I'm aware, it's still a manga that runs, or at least it's a character that still continues. And I'm not sure how many times he was portrayed in a movie, but I do know there was another Golgo 13 movie with Sonny Chiba. And from what I've heard, Ken Takakura is the more manga accurate portrayal of the character. So the story revolves around him being given this mission to go to Iran and to take down this kind of nefarious character called Max Boa. And what I love about Max Boa is, you know, it's kind of this this mystery of like, who is this Max Boa character? And when you finally kind of see who he is, you realize that there are many different versions of him, and he has not just one, not two, not three, but many kind of maybe not doppelgangers, but he has doubles, people who kind of go around pretending to be him. And so there's a really brilliant scene where Golgo is kind of like, he's got this guy in his sights, but then he realizes there's many of them, and so it's like trying to figure out who is the real Max Boa. And I really liked that. It kind of gave the film some kind of fun, again, intrigue, as it is a word that I would use to describe the kind of the plot of this film. It was intriguing, and I really enjoyed kind of following it along, and it does kind of move into the kind of, he has to go here to kind of kill this guy, and then he's on the run because these other people are after him. There's these henchmen who come into it who are very interesting characters with their own quirks, and so it's kind of a colourful film in terms of its characters and in terms of the action. It isn't hugely like explosive like a James Bond movie, again, to make the comparison, but there's actually a pretty impressive car chase at one point in the film out in the desert, which I thought was, you know, and then a helicopter gets involved. And I'm like, holy shit, this is like a lot more elaborate than I was expecting, based on how the film had been going up until that point, which was a fairly kind of, I don't want to say routine, but, you know, there wasn't anything overly big budget feeling about it until kind of that sequence, which kind of really stood out and was fun to see towards the end of the film. But the setting of Iran is gorgeous. It really is. They talk in the extras about how it's kind of it's captured a time in Iran where things were different, and this is before the revolution in Iran, which I know very little about, but they do talk about how, like, even in one of the extras, the biographers who wrote a book about the director Junya Sato, they talk about how with Iran having the revolution, it's rare to see women without their veils on in this movie, you know, in retrospect. And so in that sense, it's kind of an interesting historical document. But some of the architecture in the film and the desert stuff, I thought was really, I loved seeing all of that. And there's some really nice cinematography that goes along with it. And when you're seeing, Duke Togo, Golgo 13 kind of just walking through the desert with like the sun and the, it's really cool, and I'm going to jump the gun a little bit, but there's probably my favorite part of all the extras on this release is the audio commentary with Mike Leader and Anna Venema. And Mike Leader, pretty much like every 5 minutes on the dot, at some point he'll be saying something interesting about the film or about manga and Ken Takakura, and he'll just say it's just cool. And I agree. There comes a point with this film where you can kind of analyze or kind of talk about certain things, like I've just about the historical kind of period of Iran that when this was shot and things like that, or the the nature of this hitman character. But really, a lot of it boils down to this film is just cool. Like, he's such a kind of like chiseled kind of limber, I don't know, just convincing. You feel like he would be a hitman, that he just is so capable, and he's so unfazed by pretty much everything. There's a torture scene which was just like, I was getting so drawn into it because he was just showing such resolve, and these guys like, oh, we're gonna break him, we're gonna break this guy easy, no problem, and he's giving them nothing, and it's just fun to watch. It's cool to watch. It's like, this guy's a badass. But he, unlike Bond, he doesn't really like there's a woman who he kind of sleeps with, and she falls in love with him a bit too quickly, in my opinion. But there's this woman who kind of falls in love with him. She comes along for the kind of the mission and stuff. But there's just a bit where she gets into bed and she's like, right, I'm going to be playing the part of your wife on this mission, and I've been told to follow that through right down to the letter. So that's me paraphrasing hugely. She gets into bed and he just kind of looks at her, and you're just thinking, what's this guy going to do? He's sizing her up, and he just looks at her, and then he's like, gets into bed, and that's it. And they get it on, but there's like no emotion on his face whatsoever. And it's talked about again that the character in the comics, or that the manga, is always the same stone-faced expression, and so the movie could never be a completely accurate portrayal of that, because obviously Ken Takakura has to show emotion when he's in these scenes, but I still don't think he does. And I think that works, and it makes the character a bit more unique than, say, your kind of James Bond type. But I don't know how much mileage you would get out of this character in multiple movies, considering he is kind of almost like the Terminator. But I would have loved to have seen a whole host of I would have loved to have seen like an ongoing series of Ken Takakura as Golgo 13. That would have been really fun. Different countries, again, like very James Bond in style. But I feel bad for making that reference, but it just does feel James Bondy, Bondish. It has that kind of flavor, I suppose. But it's like a dark James Bond, because he's a bit more ruthless, I think. Well, you could say James Bond is pretty ruthless at times too, depending on which depiction you're watching. But I thought that he was just so fun to watch, and considering he's the main character, he's in pretty much every scene. I really, really enjoyed this film a lot. And there's things that you can go into. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's one scene that I was like, wow, they really went there with something. And it was one of those typical kind of scenes in a movie like this where he is kind of framed as the hero in terms of he's the main character, he's the one on the mission that we're following, there's a bad guy, right? But he isn't really a hero, and he's not really a bad guy either. He's somewhere in between, which makes him, again, a bit more interesting. But there is a sequence in which he is set up to be the hero and to make the heroic move, and he just doesn't. And it's like, oh, wow. And you can sense a bit of conflict there. Maybe that's the one part of the film where we see a bit more emotion from him, but ultimately he's all about the mission, and that is a really impactful moment where it just sets the kind of the table of like, this is what this guy is all about, and we're going to see that through to the end. And that kind of makes you feel like it's going to be not just your typical kind of film like this that's a bit James Bondish. It's almost like an instinctual thing where I just have to keep referencing James Bond, but I don't know, because it isn't a spy movie, and there isn't really like a hitman movie subgenre. I guess there probably is, really, but I just feel like there's certain elements, like you get the debrief, and you get like, here's the mission, and then he goes to a different country, and then there's women who want to sleep with him. Do you know what I mean? It's of that ilk, I suppose. I really enjoyed this moment where he goes to find a character called Mr. Wine. I just love that name, Mr. Wine. again, it kind of feels like something out of a James Bond film. Mr. Wine. I don't know. Uh, but there's a sequence with a phone booth, that was awesome. Like, I love the build up of it. I love the reveal of it and the execution of it and the ending of it. So there's just lots of great little moments in this that I really enjoyed. And a lot of women end up getting kidnapped. And so you feel, like you're invested in. And there's even another small character whose wife gets kidnapped. And just making that very simple setup earlier on in the film that this is this man's wife. You see them interacting very lovingly. And it's a very small moment, but it kind of humanizes her, so she's not just one of the women who are kidnapped, and it makes you really want her to get saved. And so I thought that was a really smart storytelling choice to not just have, oh, here's the women, let's save the women. Like, there's at least two of them who you get to know a little bit more, or at least enough that you for me anyway, I kind of empathized and kind of didn't want any harm to come to them. So that was very well done as well in the film, I thought. And I also loved, like, just the look that he had in, like, the second half of the film with, like, the turtleneck and the jacket and the glasses. Again, to echo and reiterate the comments from Mike Leader, he's just cool. So let's get into some of the extras on this release. There is it's a 2K restoration. I thought the transfer was really good. And again, seeing the locations in Iran and some of that stuff was just really nice. Like, I love, and I've said that before, I said it before, I guess I'll just keep repeating it just in case someone's coming to these videos new and hasn't watched one of the 2.5 thousand videos on my channel. I love seeing different countries on film, specifically on film, on celluloid, in older movies, because you get a real snapshot, and there's just something about the quality of film. There's a romanticism to it. It's just a little bit off reality. And so to see these beautiful Iranian landscapes was just really nice. And some of the old ruins as well was really cool. So I love the locations of the film. And so getting a really nice 2K restoration for the transfer, I think just, really made the whole viewing experience pop even more for me. So then I did mention we had the commentary with Mike Leader and Arne Venema, and they talk a bit about the different types of manga and kind of how the Golgo 13 one fits into the kind of the manga world in terms of what people are reading and the different kind of demographics. That was interesting to me. And they talk about a lot of the actors in the film as well, the Iranian actors and stuff. And so they cover a lot of ground, and they have a bit of fun along the way as well, and kind of comment on the action in the film kind of in a way that I really enjoy. And I praise these guys a lot, but it's the kind of relaxed and kind of you feel like you're having a chat with mates. There's a lot of information, and they're very well informed on these things. They know a lot about the film industry, and also just being in the industry as well, being filmmakers and stuff. So there's that element to it, but it never feels like you're listening to a critic, which has its value too, don't get me wrong. But there's more of an everyman feel to their commentaries that I really, really love. So I really enjoyed this one from them as well. And they talk about, the portrayal by, and Mike Leader pronounces Ken Takakura's name as Ken Takura. And I don't know. I just did I miss a K there somewhere? So I don't know whether I'm wrong in saying Ken Takakura. I'll leave that in for free, or whether Mike Leader is wrong. I don't know. Either way, Ken Takura, he's a badass. He's you wouldn't want to mispronounce his name in front of him if he was still around. But I think it's fine either way. We have Lucky 13, Junya Sato's biographers on Golgo 13, a brand new interview with film writers Tatsuya Masuto and film critic Masaki Nomura. They also did a similar featurette for the Bullet Train Blu-ray from a few months ago. Really great stuff. They talk about how they were finishing up the book on his career and life in like the last few months of his life. And so he was able to read and kind of approve of what they'd done. But it was very last minute that he informed them that he was sick and passing away. But they talk about, again, the revolution in Iran and how that was interesting. That there's a really fascinating tidbit where they mention that and that's another thing I didn't mention actually, is that the film was set in Iran. It's a Japanese film. Everyone speaks Japanese, and it's so dissonant at times where you just see all of these, and these Iranian men, they all look so similar. It's the kind of, and it's probably the 70s too, but it's always the big bushy mustache and the kind of the thick hair. and they just look very Iranian, and they're speaking this perfect fluid Japanese all the time, and it's kind of strange. It's one of those conceits that just happens with foreign movies. Basically, it happens everywhere. Like Ridley Scott's the Last Duel. You've got these American actors set in 1400s France, just speaking their own accents, and for me, it's a bit more permissible when it's two different languages slash countries that I'm not familiar with. So if it's Iranian people speaking Japanese, it's not as jarring, but I do find it odd. Like there's the new Ridley Scott film Napoleon coming out soon with Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon, and they're all speaking English, and that just, I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way a little bit, but I can kind of go along with it here. But they were saying in the interview, the piece they did for the Blu-ray, that they would have the Iranian actors just count to 10, because obviously it's all dubbed afterwards. And so I thought maybe they'd have some approximation of dialogue. And I'm sure this isn't the case for the whole movie, but in some cases at least they would just be counting to 10 to do the dialogue, which it seems a bit spurious to me as well, because then you'd need to kind of have the timing would need to be there, so I'm not entirely sure, but that's what they say. So that's interesting. They mention that the creator of the manga, Golgo 13, Takao Saito, he had two conditions on the manga being adapted. So I guess this was the first time they did a Golgo 13 movie. He had two conditions for the film if they were to adapt it into a movie. And the first one is that Ken Takakura would play Golgo 13, and the second was that they would shoot it abroad. And he was kind of blown away when Toei, who produced the film, agreed to his terms. He actually wrote the first draft of the script, but it was so ambitious, I suppose, that they weren't able to produce it because it would have been too expensive to produce. And apparently the word is this was actually a very rare and faithful adaptation to the character and the manga itself, and that typically manga adaptations at that time would veer off very dramatically from the source material, but this one actually toes pretty closely to the actual character that was featured in the manga. The original theatrical trailer, it's always nice to get that. There's a funny part in the kind of text in the trailer where it says 3 months of filming across Iran. I just love how that was a selling point, and the trailer, as most of the trailers I've seen on these Blu-rays, gives away most of the action in the film. It is what it is. One very minor thing, I love the opening credits, and it looks like it's actual pieces of paper or cardboard cut out, and I just like the kind of texture of it. It feels kind of multi-layered, and it's just a nice little credit sequence. There's something I wanted to throw in there. There's no real importance there. It just was something that I noted and wanted to talk about very, very briefly. So that's that. That's the title sequence talked about. And and then you get the trailer, and then we have the booklet with a piece by Tom Mez. And I really, really have grown to become a fan of Tom Mez in terms of his audio commentaries and some of the booklets and the essays he's been writing. He gives really great historical context to a lot of the stuff that he is commenting on. The essay in this booklet is called "Love is a Loaded Gun." I really like just the design of this. The layout with the yellow and stuff is kind of really cool, but it talks about the manga and how it's part of Gekiga, which is kind of dramatic pictures, they were called, where it was aimed at more of a mature audience than regular manga, and it was part of a sub-branch that Saito kind of brought about with things like Golgo 13. And he talks about the state of Japanese cinema in the 1970s, which is really interesting, because with the rise of TV in the 60s, apparently Japanese cinema attendance was really dropping because of the again, just the rise in popularity of TV, where audiences could watch things at home for free. But whereas elsewhere in the world that wasn't much of a problem, and cinemas and film going numbers didn't take that much of a hit, in Japan it became an issue. And so the Japanese film industry really took a turn. Studios consolidated, and they also kind of stopped really focusing on kind of the female audience, and so there was a rise in kind of more male oriented and male focused films in Japan. Really interesting stuff. I love the stuff where he talks about Japanese actual history, but I like the Japanese film history too. So a really, really great essay. I really enjoyed this one. He just always seems to knock it out of the park for me. Rounds out a really nice release. There's some just really good extras on this. I really enjoyed the film. Definitely one I'd watch again. Had a lot of fun with it. It was again, it did kind of just feel like almost like a, a forgotten James Bond movie. I hate to make the comparison because I've made it about 17 different times at this point, but it is what it is. And Golgo 13 for me was really excellent. So another great release from Eureka. Really enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.